Today I'll be showing you guys how to install or create intercooler piping on a 1994 Mazda MX6. I'm not saying this is the right way, I'm not saying this is the only way, or definitely not the best way, but this is how I'm going to do it, and I'm going to show you guys how I'm personally doing it on my car. Let's get started. The purpose of intercooler piping is to go from the turbo through the intercooler, which is like a radiator for the air, out of the intercooler and into the throttle body. I've got this filter just set up so I could run the engine without the piping hooked up for now, but basically it's going to come out of there into the intercooler and back around up into the throttle body. The first step is going to be to look at how your turbo setup is, because this is always custom on these cars, so each one's going to be a little bit different, but find out where your compressor pushes air from and where you're going to be able to get pipes in and out of the engine bay from. The areas I've chosen are out of the turbo and straight down out the bottom, and then getting it back up, it's going to have to go through that hole right there in between the wastegate and the pipes. I know that's not the ideal location for intercooler piping because it will be very hot, but it is, in my car, the only location without some drastic modifications coming straight up from there and into the throttle body. Don't worry about this. My battery's disconnected right now, but the shielding that I had over this had to remove it because it was in the way of an earlier project. Underneath the car you can see the intercooler. After it's been mounted, it has an in and an out. You can see the turbo up there, and how I'm going to get the pipe up into the engine bay through there. The first step I'm taking is to mock up a set of intercooler pipes with PVC pipe and U-bends and couplers and everything. I'm just going to mock up a set just so I'll know what bends I need and what angles and corners and stuff, and then I'll probably take it to a shop and have them replicate the mold that I'm making out of PVC pipe to start with. Just to clarify, I am not using PVC pipe as my intercooler piping. I cut a nice little hole in what's left of my engine bay shroud so that I can get a pipe up to that turbo outlet. Alright, so I've measured, and about a foot is going to get me down under where I want to be. So I'm going to cut a foot of the PVC pipe. Measuring and cutting a 1 foot section of PVC pipe. 1 foot of PVC cut. My pipe was a tad bit too long, so I'm going to cut a couple inches off the end just to suck it up farther into the engine bay. So here you can see sort of how the pipe's going to fit. Got it up in that engine bay, and it's going to shoot over to there where it can go up into that intercooler. The piece going across is about 28 inches long, and that's going to get me in the proximity of the other end of the intercooler. I have cut a small section of PVC pipe just to connect to this, because this is going to attach to the intercooler for the temporary piping. So I cut another small section and added two 90-degree bends, and that's basically what your intercooler piping is going to look like on this side. Let's test fit it up under the car. Alright, I ran into my first snag here, and it's that this little bar up here is in the way of that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to heat a piece of PVC and bend it to make that little line right there. As you can see, when heated with the heat gun, it does bend. It does crinkle in the middle, but that'll work fine for, we're just trying to get the edges, and any exhaust shop will be able to find that angle of the bend there. Alright, so there you have it. It goes from up at the turbo, across, over there, and up into the thing. So what you're going to want to do now is get some painter's tape or masking tape, and I'm going to make a piece of masking tape there, and then I'll write with Sharpie there, and I'll write a number like 1 and 1, and then make a line so I'll know exactly where those line up. And then do that on all these fittings so that you know that it lines up exactly the way you want it to. Or if you aren't planning on returning these elbows like I am, lol, hey, I'm not using them, I'm just using them to mock it up. So I'm going to just temporarily borrow them, and then I'm going to return them and get my money back. That money can go towards normal couplers, and then that will be the form that I can take to the exhaust shop and have them welded. Alright, so I've numbered all the marks, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then that one's just going to go straight up into the turbo. But basically, that's one side of it done and ready to go to an exhaust shop and be welded in one piece. I think I'm actually going to have a clamp across the middle here, just so it'll be in 2 pieces. But I'll just have them cut that, or I'll take it home and cut it myself, just so I've got a little bit more maneuverability when I go to get it up there. With the first set of intercooler piping in place, you can start to run the second set. I guess that's the pipes from the intercooler through that hole. The problem is that there's a little bend that has to be made, so I'm making one with PVC. Once you've got your bend, throw it in some cold water to set it. Awesomely enough, it cleared where I needed it to, and it's coming right out the bottom where I want it to. And now it's time to get some 90-degree elbows on it and connect it to there. I think I'm going to have another disconnect connector down here so that I can remove this in 2 stages. Here you can see just how this is going to come up into the engine bay. Let's see if I can focus it a little bit. It's going to come up through there, really close to everything, and then over into the filter there, up into the thing. I think I'm going to cut that a little bit shorter just so it sits a little bit better in this engine bay. Alright, so I've got the pipe going from there. I need to bend a piece to go right along there, hugging as close to the bottom of the car as I can. Then I'm going to bend a pipe that will sort of connect up here to the throttle body, but I also have to find a place for this to go in, which should be right about there. I got this piece hooked up from there to there. That was a tricky bend to get, but I was trying to keep it as low to the car as I can. As you can see, I've put tape and markings on every one of those fittings, so when I take it out of the car I'll know what goes where and how it lines up. Up top I have removed the air filter, marked where that's going to come up, and then the throttle body right there. Let's see if I can get a light on it. The throttle body, I'm going to have this little elbow made. It's going to go right from there, and then in between that little elbow and the and this pipe is going to go my flange pipe for the for the blow-off valve. And then right on the other side of that, it's going to go that little elbow. So I know this isn't going to line up 100% perfect, but I have left room, a little bit of wiggle room with some couplers, and if need be I'll cut out a bigger section and get a bigger coupler, so I'll have a little bit more rubber wiggle room. But now I just got to get this out of the car and take it to an exhaust shop, have them fab it up for me. Alright, so here is my car, my imaginary car from the front. The turbo pushes the gases out through that pipe. They come around through the intercooler, imaginary intercooler there, then out of this pipe, over, up into the engine bay, through the blow-off valve, and into the throttle body. So that's how I have my pipes laid out. Each one is meticulously set up with a piece of tape and a mark to make sure that these forms are exactly how it is inside of the car. Now I just need to take these to an exhaust shop and have them replicate this. Drop my piping off at S&S Custom Exhaust. They said they would get it bent for me for 65 bucks, whole thing. They even put beads on it to make sure the hose couplers don't slide off the ends. So now we're just waiting for a call. It'll probably be tomorrow. In the meantime, I'm going to work on another project. Went and picked up my intercooler piping today. Very happy with it. I'll show you guys it in a little bit more detail. So here's the pipe that goes from the intercooler to the turbo. There you go. And here's the part that goes up into the engine bay. I had them leave it a little bit long there. And here's the part that connects to the throttle body. I had them leave that one a little bit long too. Just so that I'd have a little bit of play, because I can always trim it myself. So with all these parts made in metal now, I'm going to try and put them up on the car and hope they line up the way I expect them to. It was tricky, but I was able to get this pipe up through the engine bay exactly how I planned it to. That's going to go straight to the flange pipe for the blow-off valve and then straight into the throttle body. Those angles are still a little messy because I don't have any of the couplers on there yet, but that'll all fit in there. Yeah, so that's what the engine bay is going to look like. I'm pretty happy with that. So here's the underneath of the car. I've got that pipe hooked up. I left that one, had them not weld it so I could have a little bit of adjustability. Right now I've just got this zip tied on because I don't have hose clamps for it right now. But that's all going to get sucked up a little bit closer to the bottom of the car. And I'm going to put a coupler there and a coupler there. And then that runs up into the engine bay. Let's see if I can get a better shot of that. There it is going up to the top. So these are T-bolt clamps. They're called T-bolt clamps because it's a T and it's a bolt, and when you tighten it down, it applies pressure more evenly than your standard worm clamps do, which are the kind with the screw heads on them. These are what you're going to want to use. They're the preferred version. I mean, you can use worm clamps, but they tend to tear up the couplers. That's a nice clean circle, and it applies even pressure on all sides. So those are the clamps I'm going to use. So here's the bottom side of the part going to the throttle body, all done. The T-bolt clamps I had did not fit on most of the ends of these sections of pipe because I have the wrong size, but I got those from a junkyard for really cheap. So I'm using worm clamps for right now. Also, these couplers are a little bit the wrong size, but they do afford me some flexibility. Right now I've got worm clamps on there, but those will be substituted out for T-bolt clamps. One thing I've noticed is that there are little metal burrs on the inside of the cut ends of the pipes. So make sure you don't have any of those, and you're going to want to grind that down before you put it in, because you don't want any of those sucked into your engine. Right now I'm going to use a reciprocating saw to cut this in the middle, because it is a little bit too short. I'll cut it in the middle and put a coupler there to allow me a little bit of extra length.
Very good. I turned it for you.
As always, you're going to want to remove these burrs from the inside of the pipe using a Dremel or a sanding tool. Now that these pipes are in two pieces and nice and sanded down, I can put a coupler in between there, which will give me a little bit more maneuverability, as well as giving me a couple of extra inches that I need. So I got the pipe from the turbo to the intercooler hooked up. There you can see it runs right along the bottom of the car and up to the turbo. I need a little bit of a longer coupler for where it attaches to the turbo, but I have to order a couple online. But yeah, now that's all the piping in. So the air will come into the turbo through the mass airflow sensor. Then it will be compressed and shot out the bottom of that, where it will then go into that pipe. It will come out of that pipe, go across, up into the intercooler, through this piping, up underneath the car, and then it will come up into the engine bay through there, past the blow-off valve, and into the engine. On all of the pipes that don't have this nice little beaded edge, this little lip to stop the couplers from slipping off, such as this one has no lip, you're going to want to do something to make sure that it doesn't slip off. If it's, adding a bead of weld around there, or some kind of a glue or something, because you're under pressure, those are just going to slip right off the edges. I did not have a 45 angle pipe like I needed, so I'm cutting one out of half of a 90-degree pipe. Now I have two shorter 45-degree couplers, and I'm going to choose which one I want to use and clean up the end to make sure all these little metal burrs are out of it, and then we'll be able to get the piece in between the blow-off valve and the throttle body. This is my beautiful blow-off valve. It's in just your average eBay Type S. I've opted for a recirculation fitting rather than a vent to atmosphere cone, because my blow-off valve does need to be recirculated. This is the next thing we're going to put on the car, and it came with this handy dandy little kit to mount it onto the blow-off valve flange pipe. So let's get that in the car. The mounting kit comes with a gasket, two bolts, and two lock washers. So there she is, all mounted up in there. All you need to do is tighten down those screws with an Allen key set. So now all the intercooler piping is all the way in and bolted down nice and tight. The last thing that we're going to have to do is find a way to get this mass airflow sensor in front of this turbo and somehow get air from this blow-off valve flange in between the mass airflow sensor and the turbo itself. So the problem I've run into right now is that this does not fit the MAF where I need it to be, and I also need to get a I have to get a recirculation tube from the blow-off valve in between these two articles here. So I think what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to cut off this neck for this tube. You can relocate it to the other side of the car where your windshield wiper fluid reservoir is, but this is your coolant overflow bottle. The only thing that attaches to it is the hose from this stir pot, and to my knowledge that goes down to the bottom of the overflow container, and the overflow container has fluid in it at all times, and when the engine needs it, it sucks in more fluid, and when it has too much fluid, it overflows it back in there. And this is sort of like the where it allows it to have a variable amount of fluid in there. That's to my understanding. Also, from the people I've talked to, if I cut off just this neck, because this goes down into there, that's the bottle. So if I cut off just that neck, and it should be fine because it's not under any pressure. The only reason this has a cap is just to stop debris from falling in there, and it has a measuring stick. So my plan is to measure to the bottom of this container with a tool of some sort, then measure this stick and see how far off the bottom of this is. Then cut off the neck, cut this shorter, fashion a new lid to fit over the little what's remaining of the fill neck there, and measure that to find the distance, cut this and cut it shorter so it'll still hang the same distance from the bottom of the container, so I'll still be able to read it accurately. That's what my plan is for now. Measuring down to the bottom of the overflow tank, I've measured that it's around 14 inches, give or take. Now I'm going to cut off this neck with a razor knife. I'm going to use a pipe cutting tool for PVC to cut the bottom of that off, because the razor knife would not cut it. It just wasn't cutting it. Oh, here goes nothing. Man, this nest of wires really is getting in the way here. Well, I didn't want to go to this, but I'm going to use a Dremel with a cutoff wheel because I just can't get anything else in there. Making sure very carefully not to get too much debris into the container or to cut the wires. So close. At this point we were just being held on by one little sliver. So that is the radiator overflow tank fill neck cut off. There's the hole where that was, and let's measure how deep it is now. It is around 9 inches now, which means that we have cut off around 5 inches. Yay math, it used to be up to 14, and now it is 9. So if we cut 4 inches off of the cap stick thing, so this little fill neck gauge dipstick thing is 14 inches long, saying that it was touching all the way to the bottom. So we're just going to cut it and make sure it still touches the bottom. So I used the Dremel to cut off a top of a spray paint can cap, and I left the middle section, and it gave me this perfect little plug to cover that hole. It fits just perfectly inside, and it's actually pretty snug, and that'll stop any debris from going in. And then we just need to find a way to glue the dipstick in through there. So I am a genius. I cut off the top of the other cap, and I cut the dipstick shorter, I stuck the two dipstick parts together. See if I can focus. I stuck them together and put some glue in there and a zip tie. And I glued the top of the old cap inside of this cap. So this is how this is going to sit. Both these ends are actually in there. This coupler isn't as long as I would want. I will invest in a longer coupler, but that does cover both ends, and I'll put a hose clamp on it, and then I'm going to cut a hole for a 1/inch nipple, and then I'm going to get a hose and run it to that blow-off valve right there. But there are some vacuum lines you're going to have to run, some new ones, and some that are going to have to be repurposed that are already there and stuff like that. So I'm going to show you guys what to do with those. There are two hoses that go to the back of the intake elbow. One is for the PCV valve, positive crankcase ventilation, I believe. That one can be just vented to atmosphere, I'm pretty sure. The other one goes to the EGR vent solenoid, which also can be vented to atmosphere. The front PCV is this line there. I have mine running to an oil catch can, which will have a filter on the other side and just be vented to atmosphere. But where that used to suck from is right here, and you can't leave that open or you're going to have a massive vacuum leak. So I actually use that and attach that as the vacuum line to my blow-off valve. Now the last line you're going to have to run will be to the wastegate, so that it knows when to open. And I went ahead and unhooked. I followed all the lines back to where the VRIS gets its vacuum from, because you're not going to need your VRIS with the turbo. So I ran the line from where that hooked up down to the wastegate down in there and attached it to the bottom side of that, as I believe it is supposed to go. The next thing I'm going to be doing is getting this 1-inch diameter hosing that I have and finding a way to connect that to the coupler in between these two. I need to get a right angle fitting because the hose doesn't bend enough. So this is the blow-off valve recirculation tube. I'm using PVC right now, but that should hold up because it is pre-turbo, so it's not going to be too hot. This is a 1-inch pipe, 1-inch piece of heater hose. With that and everything else plugged in, that is all of your intercooler piping in. Thanks for watching.